Imagine being told that you can't attend your own wedding. That's exactly what happened to this soldier, and you won't believe the reason why. Today we're diving into the shocking story of how a decorated military officer was banned from one of the most important days of his life. His commanding officers, his fiancée, and even the wedding venue all turned against him in a series of events that would change his life forever. Year was 2019, and Staff Sergeant James Collins was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. As a member of the Army's elite 82nd Airborne Division, Collins had already completed 2 tours in Afghanistan and had earned several commendations for his service. His military career was on the rise, and so was his personal life. He was engaged to be married to his college sweetheart, Melissa. They had been dating for 6 years, having met at a mutual friend's barbecue while Melissa was finishing her nursing degree. The relationship had survived long deployments, the stress of military life, and the challenges of maintaining a connection while being thousands of miles apart. Despite all these obstacles, their love had endured, and they were finally ready to tie the knot. The wedding was scheduled for June 15, 2019, at a picturesque vineyard just outside of Fayetteville. It was going to be a perfect summer wedding with about 150 guests, including family members, friends, and many of Collins' fellow soldiers. The couple had been planning this day for over a year, saving every penny they could to make it special. Everything seemed to be falling into place. The venue was booked, the catering was arranged, and Melissa had found her dream dress. Collins had even managed to secure 3 weeks of leave for their honeymoon in Hawaii. It was shaping up to be the perfect start to their married life together. But then, just 8 weeks before the wedding, something unexpected happened. Collins' unit received deployment orders. They were being sent to a classified location in the Middle East for a sensitive operation. The timing couldn't have been worse. Collins immediately went to speak with his commanding officer, Captain Rivera. He explained the situation and asked if there was any way he could still attend his wedding before joining the deployment. Captain Rivera was sympathetic, but explained that the mission was time-sensitive and required every available member of the unit. "I understand your situation, Collins," Captain Rivera said, "but this is the reality of military service. Sometimes personal sacrifices have to be made. I'll see what I can do, but I can't make any promises." Collins left the meeting feeling dejected, but still hopeful. After all, he had an exemplary service record, and this was his wedding day we're talking about. Surely, there had to be some compromise that could be reached. Over the next few days, Collins explored every option available to him. He spoke with the unit's deployment coordinator, filed an official request for a delayed deployment, and even looked into the possibility of a quick courthouse wedding before leaving. But each avenue led to the same answer. The needs of the mission came first. When he broke the news to Melissa, she was understandably devastated. They had already sent out invitations, made non-refundable deposits, and had family members who had booked flights from across the country. Postponing wasn't just a matter of changing a date. It would mean losing thousands of dollars and disappointing everyone who had planned to attend. "Why can't they send someone else?" Melissa asked through tears. "It's not fair, James. We've been planning this for so long." Collins tried to explain the situation as best he could without revealing classified information. "It's not that simple, Mel. This mission is important, and they need everyone with my specific training." The conversation was difficult, but they agreed to explore all options before making any decisions. Maybe they could move the wedding up, or perhaps Collins could join the deployment late. There had to be a solution. Collins went back to Captain Rivera the next day with a new proposal. What if they held the wedding ceremony a few weeks earlier, before the deployment began? He would only need 48 hours, 1 day for the ceremony, and 1 day to recover before shipping out. Captain Rivera took the request to his superiors, but the answer came back negative. The pre-deployment training schedule was already compressed, and they couldn't afford to have anyone miss even a single day. The mission parameters were strict, and the timeline was non-negotiable. But there was something else going on beneath the surface, something that Collins didn't know about yet. 2 months earlier, Collins had been part of a training exercise that had gone wrong. A miscommunication had led to a near-miss incident where live ammunition was used in what was supposed to be a blank-fire scenario. No one was injured, but it had been a serious breach of protocol. As the senior non-commissioned officer present, Collins had taken responsibility and filed the appropriate reports. What he didn't know was that this incident had triggered an internal investigation. The Army was looking into whether proper procedures had been followed, and Collins' name was at the center of it all. The timing of the deployment wasn't coincidental. It was partly designed to remove key personnel from Fort Bragg while the investigation proceeded. But when Collins kept pressing the issue of his wedding, it raised red flags among the command staff. They began to question his commitment to the unit and the mission. Was he putting his personal life ahead of his duty? This doubt, combined with the ongoing investigation, created a perfect storm that would soon engulf Collins' career and personal life. As the deployment date grew closer, the situation became more tense. Collins' requests were being met with increasing resistance. He started to notice that he was being excluded from certain briefings, and some of his fellow soldiers were treating him differently. There was a growing sense that he was being singled out, though he couldn't understand why. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Collins was called into a meeting with Captain Rivera and Major Lewis, the battalion executive officer. The atmosphere in the room was cold and formal, nothing like the usual camaraderie of the unit. "Staff Sergeant Collins," Major Lewis began, "we've reviewed your numerous requests regarding your upcoming wedding, and we've made a final decision." Collins sat up straight, hoping against hope for good news. "Not only is your request for leave denied, but we're also issuing a direct order prohibiting you from attending any wedding ceremony during the period of May 1st to July 30th, 2019. Collins couldn't believe what he was hearing. They weren't just denying his leave request, they were explicitly forbidding him from getting married. "Sir, with all due respect, can you explain the reasoning behind this order?" Collins asked, struggling to maintain his composure. Major Lewis exchanged a glance with Captain Rivera before continuing. "We have reason to believe that you may be attempting to use this wedding as a way to avoid deployment. Additionally, there are ongoing concerns about your recent performance and commitment to the unit." The accusation hit Collins like a physical blow. In his entire career, he had never once tried to shirk his duty. He had volunteered for difficult assignments, worked extra hours, and had always put the needs of the mission and his fellow soldiers first. "Sir, that's not true. I've always—" Major Lewis cut him off. "This decision is final, Staff Sergeant. You will report for pre-deployment training as scheduled, and you will deploy with your unit. If you attempt to circumvent this order, you will face disciplinary action under the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Collins left the meeting in a state of shock. He had just been banned from his own wedding. The implications were staggering not just for him, but for Melissa and everyone else involved. How was he going to explain this to her? How would their families understand? And what about all the money they had already spent? When Collins called Melissa that evening, the conversation was even more difficult than he had imagined. She couldn't comprehend how the Army could forbid someone from getting married. It seemed like an overreach of military authority into their personal lives. "How can they do this?" she asked, her voice rising with anger and frustration. "It's our wedding, James. They can't just ban you from it." Collins tried to explain the situation, but even he didn't fully understand what was happening. All he knew was that disobeying a direct order could end his military career and potentially result in a court-martial. "We'll figure something out," he promised, though he had no idea what that might be. "Maybe we can postpone until after I get back." But Melissa wasn't ready to accept that solution. "We've already paid for everything. My family has booked flights. My dress is being altered. We can't just put everything on hold indefinitely." The strain was taking a toll on their relationship. What should have been a time of joy and anticipation had become a source of stress and conflict. Collins felt caught between his duty to his country and his commitment to the woman he loved. The next day, Collins sought advice from the base legal office. He wanted to know if there was any way to challenge the order or at least understand the legal basis for it. The military lawyer he spoke with, Lieutenant Alvarez, reviewed the situation carefully. "This is unusual," Lieutenant Alvarez admitted. "While commanding officers have broad authority over personnel under their command, explicitly prohibiting someone from getting married is extreme. There would need to be a compelling military necessity to justify such an order." Lieutenant Alvarez promised to look into it further and get back to Collins as soon as possible. In the meantime, Collins decided to reach out to some of his fellow soldiers to see if they could shed any light on the situation. What he discovered was troubling. According to several members of his unit, the command had been conducting an investigation into the training incident from 2 months ago. There were rumors that someone high up wanted to make an example of those involved, and Collins' name had been mentioned frequently. One of his closest friends in the unit, Sergeant Martinez, pulled him aside after physical training. "Look, man, I shouldn't be telling you this, but there's talk that they're using this deployment to push you out. The wedding thing, they're hoping you'll disobey the order so they have grounds for disciplinary action." Collins was stunned. "Why would they want to push me out? My record has been clean up until now." Martinez shrugged. "Politics, man. Someone needs a scapegoat for that training incident, and you filed the report, so your name is on everything. Just watch your back, okay?" This new information put Collins in an impossible situation. If what Martinez said was true, then the command was deliberately trying to force him into a position where he would have to choose between his career and his wedding. Either way, he would lose something important. Lieutenant Alvarez contacted Collins 2 days later with more information. "I've reviewed the order, and I have some concerns about its legality," she said. "While the military can certainly deny leave requests, explicitly prohibiting you from participating in a legal civilian activity like marriage is questionable. However, challenging this order would be a lengthy process, and there's no guarantee of success before your deployment date. Collins thanked her for the information but felt no closer to a solution. Time was running out, and he needed to make a decision soon. That weekend, Collins made the drive to Melissa's apartment in Raleigh to discuss their options face-to-face. The conversation was emotional and difficult. They explored every possibility, from defying the order and dealing with the consequences, to having the ceremony without him, to postponing indefinitely. "What if we do it anyway?" Melissa suggested. "You show up for the wedding, we get married, and then you deal with whatever happens after." Collins shook his head. "It's not that simple. If I disobey a direct order, I could face a court-martial. That means potentially losing my career, my benefits, and possibly even facing jail time. I can't put us through that." "So what do we do?" Melissa asked, tears streaming down her face. "Just give up on everything we've planned." It was a question Collins couldn't answer. He loved Melissa and wanted nothing more than to marry her, but he also had a duty to his country and his fellow soldiers. The thought of letting down either one was unbearable. As the deployment date drew closer, Collins made one final attempt to resolve the situation. He requested a meeting with Colonel Davidson, the battalion commander. If anyone had the authority to override the order, it would be him. The meeting was brief and to the point. Colonel Davidson listened to Collins' explanation and his plea for an exception to the order. When Collins finished speaking, the colonel leaned back in his chair. "Staff Sergeant, I understand your predicament, but I stand by the decision of my officers. The needs of the Army come first. Your wedding can wait, this mission cannot." Collins left the meeting with a heavy heart. He had exhausted all official channels and was no closer to a solution. The deployment was set to begin in 1 week, and the wedding was supposed to be the week after that. Time had run out. That evening, Collins and Melissa made the painful decision to postpone the wedding indefinitely. They would lose their deposits, and they would have to face the disappointment of their friends and family, but they didn't see any other choice. Collins couldn't risk his career, and Melissa didn't want to go through with the ceremony without him. Following day, Collins began notifying their guests about the change of plans. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done, explaining the situation without being able to provide all the details. Many were understanding, but others questioned why the Army would take such drastic measures for a one-day event. As word spread about the canceled wedding, something unexpected happened. The story caught the attention of a local news reporter who had been covering military affairs. Intrigued by the unusual circumstances, the reporter began asking questions and digging into the background of the situation. 3 days before the deployment, Collins was called into Colonel Davidson's office again. This time, the colonel was visibly upset. "Would you care to explain why there's a reporter asking questions about your wedding, Staff Sergeant?" he demanded. Collins was caught off guard. "Sir, I don't know anything about a reporter. I've just been notifying our guests about the postponement." Colonel Davidson didn't seem convinced. "This kind of attention is exactly what we don't need right now. It looks like you're trying to generate public pressure to get your way." "That's not my intention, sir," Collins protested. "I've accepted the order and have made arrangements to postpone the wedding." The colonel studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Very well, but let me be clear. Any further publicity about this matter will be considered an attempt to undermine chain of command, and I will respond accordingly." Collins left the meeting feeling as though he was being punished for something he hadn't done. The stress of the situation was taking a toll on him, affecting his sleep and his focus during pre-deployment training. He was starting to wonder if he even had a future in the Army anymore. The day before the deployment, Collins received an unexpected call from Lieutenant Alvarez. "I've been reviewing your case further," she said, "and I've discovered something interesting. The order prohibiting you from attending your wedding wasn't properly documented in official channels. It appears to have been a verbal order only, which raises questions about its enforceability." This was a potentially important development, but Collins wasn't sure what to do with the information. The deployment was happening regardless, and he had already postponed the wedding. What good would it do to challenge the order now? "I thought you should know," Lieutenant Alvarez continued. "If you decide to pursue this further after your deployment, you might have grounds for an official complaint." Collins thanked her for the information and promised to consider it. But for now, his focus needed to be on the upcoming mission. He had a responsibility to his unit and to the soldiers who would be relying on him in the field. The day of the deployment arrived, and Collins said a painful goodbye to Melissa. They had both shed many tears in the preceding weeks, but they were determined to stay strong for each other. "I'll be waiting for you," Melissa promised. "We'll have our wedding when you get back, and it will be even more special because of everything we've gone through." Collins held her tight, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the scent of her hair, the sound of her voice. "I love you," he whispered. "Never doubt that." As Collins boarded the transport plane with the rest of his unit, he couldn't help but think about what should have been. In another reality, he would be preparing for his wedding, surrounded by friends and family, ready to start a new chapter of his life with the woman he loved. Instead, he was heading into a potentially dangerous situation, carrying not just his standard gear, but also the emotional weight of the past few weeks. He wondered if he would ever truly understand why his commanders had gone to such lengths to prevent him from getting married. Was it really about the mission, or was there something more personal at play? The deployment lasted 6 months. During that time, Collins performed his duties with the same professionalism and dedication he had always shown. If anything, he worked harder than ever, determined to prove to his commanders and to himself that their doubts about his commitment were unfounded. Meanwhile, back in the States, the story of the soldier band from his own wedding had taken on a life of its own. The reporter who had initially shown interest had published a detailed article, which had been picked up by several national news outlets. Veterans organizations had weighed in, most criticizing the Army's handling of the situation. Some had even offered to help Collins and Melissa with the costs of rescheduling their wedding. Collins himself was largely unaware of all this attention. Communications from the deployment location were limited, and he was focused on the mission at hand. It wasn't until the unit was preparing to return home that he began to hear rumors about the controversy. When the plane touched down at Fort Bragg in early 2020, Collins was surprised to see Major Lewis waiting for him on the tarmac. This wasn't standard procedure for returning deployments. "Staff Sergeant Collins," Major Lewis said, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "Colonel Davidson would like to see you in his office at 1400 hours today." Collins acknowledged the order, wondering what this meeting could be about. Had the publicity surrounding his situation caused problems for the command, or was there some other issue that had arisen during the deployment? Before heading to the meeting, Collins had a joyful reunion with Melissa. Despite everything they had been through, their relationship had endured. They had maintained communication as best they could during the deployment, and their love for each other had remained strong. "I have to meet with the colonel this afternoon," Collins told her after they had spent some time catching up. "I'm not sure what it's about." Melissa squeezed his hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. We've made it this far, right?" At 1400 hours sharp, Collins reported to Colonel Davidson's office. To his surprise, Captain Rivera was also present, along with a civilian man in a suit whom Collins didn't recognize. "Staff Sergeant Collins," Colonel Davidson began, "let me introduce Mr. Thompson from the Inspector General's office. He's been conducting an investigation into several matters related to our unit, including the circumstances surrounding your deployment and canceled wedding." Collins stood at attention, unsure of how to respond. "Yes, sir." Mr. Thompson stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant, we've been looking into the training incident from last year and the subsequent actions taken by your chain of command. Based on our findings, it appears that there were some irregularities in how the situation was handled." Colonel Davidson cleared his throat. "What Mr. Thompson is trying to say is that we made a mistake. The order prohibiting you from attending your wedding was inappropriate and exceeded the bounds of military authority. It should never have been issued." Collins was stunned. This was the last thing he had expected to hear. "Furthermore," Colonel Davidson continued, "the investigation has revealed that the training incident was not your fault. The responsibility lay with senior officers who failed to properly communicate the parameters of the exercise. Your actions during and after the incident were entirely appropriate." Mr. Thompson nodded in agreement. "We're recommending a formal apology from the command and compensation for any financial losses you and your fiancée incurred due to the postponement of your wedding." Collins struggled to process this information. After months of stress, uncertainty, and heartache, he was being told that it had all been a mistake, a misunderstanding that could have been avoided if the command had simply conducted a proper investigation from the beginning. "Thank you, sir," Collins managed to say. "I appreciate you acknowledging the error." Colonel Davidson stood up and extended his hand. "Staff Sergeant Collins, on behalf of the battalion and myself personally, I apologize for the hardship this situation has caused you and your fiancée. You've served this unit with distinction, and you deserved better." Collins shook the colonel's hand, still somewhat in shock. "What happens now, sir?" "Now," Colonel Davidson said, "you're going to take some well-deserved leave. 30 days, starting tomorrow, and I expect to receive an invitation to your wedding." Collins couldn't help but smile. "Yes, sir, I think that can be arranged." After the meeting, Collins rushed to share the news with Melissa. They had been through so much, and now, finally, they could move forward with their plans. The rescheduled wedding took place on a beautiful spring day in April 2020. The venue was different. They had chosen a charming garden closer to Melissa's hometown, but many of the original guests were able to attend. Colonel Davidson made an appearance, as did several members of Collins' unit, including Captain Rivera and Sergeant Martinez. As Collins stood at the altar, watching Melissa walk toward him in her wedding dress, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The challenges they had faced had tested their relationship, but they had emerged stronger for it. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause from their friends and family seemed to go on forever. It was a celebration not just of their love, but of their resilience and determination in the face of adversity. In the years that followed, Collins would continue his military career, earning promotions and taking on new responsibilities. The incident that had once threatened to derail his life had become a footnote in his otherwise distinguished service record. But he never forgot the lessons he had learned during that difficult time, about the importance of standing up for what's right, about the power of perseverance, and about the strength that comes from having someone by your side who believes in you unconditionally. The soldier who was banned from his own wedding had not only survived the experience, but had emerged from it with a deeper appreciation for the things that truly matter in life.